Thank you, and hi everybody. Good morning from San Francisco. It's great to see everybody here, and we are super excited to welcome all of you to this open and live discussion uh, about security and DevOps and engineering. And I'm here with three great friends and great security leaders. And maybe I will start with introducing myself. I'm Idan Tendler, the CEO and the co-founder of Bridgecrew. We equip engineers, security engineers, with all the tools and the automation they need to run effectively, smoothly infrastructure security. And today we will discuss about the state of collaboration, between engineering and DevOps and security, how these teams work together, how they should work together, what's not working, what's real, and what's promising here. And maybe I will start with two housekeeping items. First, we would love to get your questions in the Q&A here. Please mention your full name if possible, and I will try to pop up questions to the participants as much as possible. Second thing, we're not going to talk about politics, and we're not going to talk about COVID today. Probably these two items are becoming the same one recently. So please, no questions about that. And we will start by introducing our great panelists. We have Caleb Sima, and we have Kartik Pangarajan, and we have Eli Khan. So maybe guys, we start by introducing each one. So Caleb, you will go first.
Hi, I'm Caleb Sima, VP of Security at Databricks.
And Kartik.
Hey everyone, I'm Kartik Pangarajan. I'm a Director of Security at Robinhood.
It's great. And Eli.
Hi there, my name is Eli Khan. I'm a Principal Product Manager at AWS.
Thank you, and it's great to have you here with me. And maybe just to get some background, I would love to hear from each one of you. How did you get into security? What brought you into this incredible industry? Caleb, you should go first.
What got me into security? So way before the internet, there's these things called bulletin board systems. I am placing my age, for those of you who know this, where you used to sort of join these BBSs and read files. It was basically like a forum. And I remember when I was a kid, there was this one post around how to make free payphone calls and building a red box. And this is when payphones were like a thing. And I was like, there's no way you could do that. Went to Radio Shack, put all the pieces together, tested it, and it worked. And I was hooked. From that point forward, I basically became really hardcore into phone freaking at the time what it was called. And that just drove me down this road, and I've never left since.
Amazing. Kartik, Eli, what brought you into security?
Let Eli go first.
Sure. So my start into cybersecurity actually really started with national security interests. When I was in college, I did an internship with the EPA and Department of Defense and ended up spending the summer in Russia on a nuclear non-proliferation project, and had my room bugged by the FSB. And I was like, wow, how cool is this? And after spending some time working on homeland security, national security issues in the federal government after college, I transitioned into the cybersecurity world because, really the top national security risk was becoming cybersecurity issues, and it was a pretty natural progression from there.
Amazing. Kartik?
How did I get into security? I think I always had a taste for the subversive almost. But my first sort of foray into security was as a kid trying to get access to my dad's dial-up internet and trying to figure out how I can get to the internet despite him locking everything down. But as I got into grad school, I just got interested in system security and application security, and that's never looked back since. It's just been this curiosity of how things work and how I can take them apart.
That's cool. Good to know that. So let's talk about the biggest item that we have for today, and this is collaboration. Collaboration between security and engineering DevOps. And maybe the first question, maybe it's the hardest one, but what do you think is the biggest challenge when it comes to collaboration between these two teams? Maybe Caleb, you should go first.
Oops, I'm on mute. That is a super loaded question.
Yeah.
So, I feel like if I were to go to its core, ultimately, I think there are two different priorities, right? Well, let me rephrase that. Like, being aligned in a single priority is difficult. And I think that it really matters at stage of company, culture of company. But fundamentally, engineering's number one focus is building and delivering product, right? That is their number one goal. And generally, they're building and delivering product in order to enable sales, right? Like that is sort of the number one goal of engineering versus the security team, although they also want to make sales, right? Because without a successful company, you don't have a company. But I think their top priority is managing and reducing risk. And so you sort of have, managing and reducing risk has been predominantly, more conservative, obviously less risk-taking, more careful, right? Versus enabling and delivering product is the opposite of that, which is faster, get to market, more features. And so you sort of have this pull fundamentally between the two. And so they have different goals that they're trying to achieve that are just opposed to each other. And I think that fundamentally that's what creates that tension.
Yeah. To build on what Caleb was saying, yeah, I think the biggest challenge in getting alignment is, at the top level, having the support from leadership, all the way down from the CEO. There needs to be a very clear alignment that security is a top priority. And you need to be able to deliver security in an agile, flexible, fast manner so you don't slow down those application development teams any more than what's absolutely needed. But there needs to be a very clear priority that as an organization, we will not deliver insecure code. So I think that's the initial challenge, making sure that you have top level leadership buy-in in that commitment. I think once you have that, the next challenge is really building out the mechanisms to operationalize that, because it's not going to happen on its own. You need lots of different mechanisms to really make that happen. And I think maybe as we get into the conversation here, we can explore what some of those mechanisms are.
Yeah, like exactly how does the top do that in a practical, pragmatic way?
Yeah,
that works, right? Yeah.
Yeah,
Karthik,
I mean,
what do you think?
Yeah.
I'm allowing Karthik to jump in, so I don't know if he's going to jump in or if I'm going to like dig into that.
No, I was just going to say, I think that to me, the challenge has always been one of whenever there is friction, it's because team A is, in this case, DevOps will be like, we need to do the following because these are the pressures we have. And team B just goes and say, no, that's insecure. That's wrong. That's not safe. We generally don't say, here's how you can do this better. We just say, don't do it that way. And that isn't always helpful. It's just like, don't click on phishing emails. Like, yeah, that's not what I intended to do. I didn't know it was a phishing email. It's the same lesson. Don't do the unsafe thing. I wasn't intending to, I just didn't know it was the unsafe thing. So we don't always provide the right alternatives. We just say, don't do X. We don't say do Y. And in my experience, that's where I've seen a lot of friction and disagreements is when we don't provide actionable engineering or business input, and we just say the negative thing.
But Karthik, maybe I want to ask you. Eli said something that I really liked. It starts with priorities, right? You need to explain to the leadership that security is a priority. How do you do that? How do you engage, and how do you explain? How do you convince that it is a priority?
Can I throw out there? Oh, you're asking Karthik. Okay, I'm gonna let Karthik answer.
Yeah.
For me, it's actually not. It hasn't been that hard, at least at Robinhood, because we care so deeply about the security of our customers and the security of the firm. It's been more of a conversation of the executive team asking me, "Hey, what do you need?" more than me telling them, "Hey, I need the following things." Uh, but when broadly speaking, in my time as a consultant or in my time at other companies, the way I've always shared security concerns to the executive team is by presenting it as a business risk. By not doing this, what are you not allowing your business to do? And is this something you're okay with your business not doing? Or by not doing this, these are the risks that your business is going to face, and these are the consequences of that. And I basically draw it out for them. I go from here's the best case scenario, and here's the worst case scenario, and here's everything in between. This is choose your own adventure. Tell me what adventure you want to choose, and I'll help you through it.
And I would also say, practically speaking, that answer depends on the kind of company you are, the stage of company you are, the market that you're in. Like there are companies like finance, for example, that naturally have a lot to lose, and security is naturally going to be in a higher level of priority for these organizations. So it's easier to convince them to spend budget in the security because you have a lot more to lose, quote unquote, right, in terms of finance. And then there's ones that don't, and compliance is the only forcing function in security. Well, the priority is now driven from the top because, well, I can't get these customers unless I comply, and I have to prove compliance in order to enable revenue. And so then there are that stage of companies that kind of force those. And then there are the ones that are the lower sort of end of the scale where there is no real driver. So you either they spend the minimal amount that they need to, or somehow you convince leadership that security can be a business enabler, as per Karthik, or maybe even something that can be used to drive revenue. Can security be a revenue generator in some form or fashion? If I were to say it very broadly, there's these types of companies, and you as a operator, which one are you in? There are ones that are way easier where you don't have to do that. There are ones that are way harder. And also the stage, right? If you're early, no matter which one of these companies, security is going to be usually lower on the scale, right? But then as you grow into a more mature company, more security investment, more security comes into play. And then again, as leadership, a lot of leadership may just say, well, I just want to be good enough at security compared with other peers in my industry and where I'm at. And so like there are certain leaders that's what matters to them.
Yeah, I just want to add to that and say I've been fortunate to work at companies where security, at least when I come in, security is a priority. So I've been fortunate that way, where I haven't had to fight for resources as much. But I will say that my risk tolerance only goes down as my time at a company increases. So when I started a company, my risk tolerance is pretty high because at least in the last 7 years, I've started as the first security person to build a security program. So I have to be tolerant of more risks purely by the function of staying sane and helping the business do the things the business wants to do. But as the business matures and the company gets older and I start building a larger team, my risk tolerance starts going down, and I start pushing back on things a little bit more and saying, this is really not a risk you want to take right now. Versus before I would say, maybe you don't want to take this risk. Think about it.
I would also like to note that Karthik has been working at financial companies, so that might be a nice indicator.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I think, Idan, to go back to your question, like, how do you convince leadership that security is important and should be a priority? Well, I think the first step of that is, working with your leadership team to understand what are the top risks facing your business, not just security risks, but what are the top risks facing your business, and where does security sit within that risk set? If you're an early stage company, your top risk is probably getting your next round of funding, or otherwise the company will fold. Maybe your security risks are much, much lower on that risk register. So, I think, but it doesn't need to be necessarily a super complex risk assessment, but, generally thinking about different risk scenarios and stack ranking them and thinking through, okay, these are the types of risks that we need to invest in. Obviously,
But
that risk assessment can get more complex and elegant as you mature.
Eli, it's one thing to convince the CEO and the board of directors, but eventually you need to work with this engineer. And he works in this team, and he didn't see even your presentation, right? And he didn't see the survey of the risks.
Yeah.
How do you work with them? How do you work with engineers? How do you make them engaged?
Yeah, I mean, this is an area where AWS has just done some absolutely amazing things in terms of building out mechanisms to really ensure that security stays a top priority in the delivery of new services and new features. Just as a simple example, so AWS has a master roadmap tool. And so every time we launch a new feature or an entire new service, that has to be entered into the AWS roadmap tool. Because without that entry, you can't get any marketing support. So you can't do any blogs, you can't do any announcements, you can't do anything without that entry into the roadmap tool. Now, there's an automated process. Whenever a new feature gets entered into the roadmap tool, that automatically kicks off a security review. And as the engineering point of contact and product point of contact, if you think that feature doesn't need a security review, you have to file a ticket with reasons and get approval from the security team that this thing doesn't need a security review. So every single feature that AWS launches automatically gets a security review. So it doesn't really matter if you're an engineer, you don't, for some reason, believe that security is important, although there's lots of training that we do to help reinforce that idea as well, because you have to do it. You don't have a choice.
So and I'll also tell you the other spectrum where at AWS scale, you have the security team has the resources, has the processes, has the executive support to enable these kinds of things. But let's say you're in a fast growing company. One, the security team doesn't have the resources. They're definitely not as mature in the organization to have this. There is definitely no thing from the top saying if your product cannot be deployed if it doesn't pass security review. Those things don't exist inside the company that's fast growing. And so then now you've got to figure out, well, then how do I approach or message top risks in a way that doesn't require this? And by the way, like, for example, we even put this is like a vision for us, which is no feature gets deployed without a security review, right? Like that is like a far vision because we don't have the people, the time, or the capability. I think.
But what's the reality, Caleb?
Yeah.
What's really going on? What is the reality? If this is the vision, so what is the reality?
Yeah, the reality is we have at least 40 features per quarter that come out, right? With a small team of security individuals that have no capability to both review at an architecture level, code level, pen testing level around these features. And so you have to sit there and say, okay, well, what are the important features out of these 40 that we really need to look at? Right? Do they touch things that are sensitive, like auth? Do they touch customer data in some form or fashion? And then we've got to look at those and say, okay, can we audit those at least in that process before they get produced? And by the way, many times we can't, right? We just don't have the level of resourcing and capability to do that. So we have to figure out different ways in automation. Like, here's a good example. Even though we're a really fast growing company, most people look at secure design reviews as some of the last things that you do. We actually hit that as one of the first things that we do, because the reason why is because features and products are getting produced so fast. We have no capability, and so that creates this long queue of things that we'll just never get to. So then we said, well, okay, at least if we focus at the things coming out new, right? So any new features and new secure design reviews, if we have our eyes on that, at least the stuff then starting to be produced will have a better level of gauge as to what's happening. So we actually did a lot of effort at the beginning, at the security design, at the threat, creating security champions program, a lot of that to kind of loop these guys in so that we at least focus on the new stuff coming out. And that has helped a lot. And in a sense, we kind of, not that we forget about the things that have become before that program, but it gives us a chance to draw a line and then start seeing what's happening further on. So that's been an example of where we've really made some good progress there.
That's cool. Karthik, what do you see? Do you have like an interesting example of inspiring or challenging communication that you had with engineering?
Yeah, I don't know if it's challenging many times. I don't know if I have anything inspiring. I think, one thing I'll say here when it comes to working with a broader engineering team, specifically, I think with the DevOps team, we've had a really good relationship. Fortunately, it has had its share of challenges and we've had our share of disagreements, but we've had a really good relationship. But on the engineering side, I think one of the moves I made is I had a similar challenge to Caleb in the sense that there was no way we could actually review every single security, every single product or every single thing that shipped. It was just not going to be possible at a company that moves as fast as early stage startups do. And one of the things I ended up doing was building a software engineering team and said, okay, any security sensitive things that we're going to ship, I'm going to ship it for you. And that was a massive risk I took, because if you get it wrong, then you get it wrong. Like, for instance, my team manages our frontline authentication service. Like, as soon as you interact with the app, that's a service my team manages. And we see a lot of requests come in every day when the market opens, and it has to be stable, it has to be performant, it can't drop anything, stuff like that. But doing that enabled us to then go to the engineering team and say, no, that doesn't look right to us. You're not going to ship that. You're going to work with us. Because when you are shipping a service that is super scalable, that is secure, that you have proved sort of your worth to the engineering team by being a part of them and getting into the trenches with them, they tend to listen to a little bit more and say, okay, you guys know what you're doing. You're not just sitting in your ivory tower and pontificating and telling us what to do. You've rolled up your sleeves and gotten into the muck with us. So that has helped us navigate a lot of challenges. Does that mean that we have it all right? No security team has it all right. We still run into some challenges. Like there was a conversation we had with the DevOps team around secrets management recently where I said, okay, we're going to handle this for you. And then I hired somebody, a staff engineer, that came in and said, no, this is terrible. I'm not going to do this. We're going to do something else entirely. They're going to keep this. And I had to go back to my partner and be like, so remember how I said I would take this from you? I'm not. So let's talk about that. And that was not the best or the most pleasant conversation I've had in my career. So yeah, so it comes with its blessings, but it also comes with its challenges.
So this is like an interesting debate though here, which is, do we see security, like in your position, becoming engineering, right? Where you're taking over ownership of quote unquote engineering responsibilities and services. Or does engineering just take over security, right? Where, does each engineering team own their own security to a certain extent, right? Like for example, there's definitely this, what I call somewhat, maybe standard model of security operations outside of the organization, right? Similar to sort of like the QA organization somewhat used to be, where engineering starts eating away. Right now, QA kind of goes away and it becomes like this internal DevOps kind of team testing and performance. Does this happen in security, or does security go the other way? Security starts owning items inside of engineering, like what you're doing. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I like the model of security owning items inside of engineering. And the way I see it is, Netflix talks about this a lot, the whole paved path approach or the guardrails, not gates approach. But the way I see it, honestly, is it is going to be more successful for you as a security leader if you have the engineering chops and the talent to just work closely with the engineering teams to help them ship something versus just be the friction point. At some point, yeah, like it has to be both. One of my engineers calls this, the shield, the umbrella versus the storm. Most times you're going to be the umbrella and say, I'm going to make sure that you're not affected by the storm. I'm going to help you ship this. I'm going to help you keep this safe. But a lot of times you've got to be the storm, and you've got to come in and say, listen, that is just a bad idea, or this isn't designed very well, or this is going to bring inordinate risk to the firm. We're not happy with what you're doing here. But in order to be the storm, in order to build that relationship to be the storm, you've got to be the umbrella more often than not. Like, to me, that's how I see. I come from a South Asian family. I'm generally a very non-confrontational person. So for me, I generally like to make these sort of conciliatory relationships and say, I'm just going to help you do this and help mitigate this risk, even if it is more work for me, even if it means that I have to staff an entire team who are just software engineers that are shipping things. I see that as a worthy investment.
What do you think, Eli? Is it a cultural, is it technical thing? Is it a trend that we will see more and more security shifting responsibilities to engineering, or vice versa?
You're on mute.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Eli, you.
Saving you all from the sirens over here from the police station next door. But I think there is a huge trend happening right now around the decentralization of security from centralized security teams down to the DevOps engineers that are actually responsible for the cloud infrastructure that they're building on. And that's something that we've done a lot of inside AWS. We haven't done anything like Kartik mentioned, where sort of security is actually building and managing some features on behalf of the engineering teams. I could see how that works, but from the AWS perspective, we really like to limit any cross-team dependencies. Like, we like to have each development team to be relatively self-encapsulated and not be dependent on infrastructure run by other teams, just because that can cause friction in terms of our agile release processes. But I can see how that works. There's certainly multiple paths to success. But inside AWS, ultimately, every AWS account owner is responsible for the security inside their accounts, and that's operationalized in a lot of really interesting ways. One way is, we have this thing internally called the AWS policy engine that is flagging any insecure configurations inside an account that you own. And a weekly email is sent out every Sunday night to everyone in the company that is a manager or even an employee that has a security issue inside their AWS account, or has an employee who has a security issue inside their AWS accounts. Those security issues are flagged in terms of severity, and they're flagged in terms of how long they've been there for.
And it's actionable, or is it mainly to create awareness?
No, there's detailed remediation recommendations about how to resolve that. And how, if you think that this is an acceptable risk, or if it's by design, how to file a ticket for an exception. And I think the really cool part about this, and this sort of just speaks to some of the cultural aspects that we're talking about earlier, is at the top, there's transparency. So this is all rolled up through the organization chart. And at the top, the different vice presidents across the company not only see their issues and how many they have, at what severity level, how long they've existed, but also how they compare to the other vice presidents. And trust me, no vice president wants to be the worst at security in AWS. And so this creates a culture of, making sure as a priority, your teams are burning down those security issues. So I mean, it's sort of one really nice mechanism that I think we do here.
So there's a clear difference between security audit in your organization, where there's probably a central team that collects the vulnerabilities, scans for the vulnerabilities, does the rest.
Yeah.
But then clearly, ownership of those issues is within each team. Let me ask you a question about how do you, like, one item, like you noted, is each team isn't dependent on others, which creates that sort of really fast iteration. But I'd also think that you lose consistency of remediation. So for example, take Karthik. Like Karthik's like, hey, I build secure, like if you want a database, Karthik, I'm putting words in your mouth, but I think this is what you're saying. But like, if I want to build a database, I have a secure model or image that security has created that then you use, right? In your environment, I'm assuming that doesn't exist, right? Because then you'd be dependent upon these, teams to produce that.
I mean, so it exists in a different form, in a few different forms. One, the secure configurations are all encoded via automated checks. So, if a particular, team is not using TLS in a correct, or SSL in a correct way, they'll get flagged on that very quickly with a high severity detection that, if not remediated, is quickly escalated up to their boss, and boss is a boss, et cetera. We also have this really amazing resource that we call Aristotle, which we use for threat modeling, which is a required step. You cannot launch a new service until you have a threat model that's been approved by the security team. But we make that threat modeling easier with a really robust database, searchable database of threats and controls against those threats. So, we try to build these tools that, allow you to, have those secure development and coding practices, but in a more distributed manner.
Caleb, what kind of tools you're using in Databricks to facilitate this communication and shared responsibility?
You mean like products or vendor products?
No, like internal tools, so mechanisms. How do you do that? How do you do that internally?
Help narrow the question for me.
I think Idan's asking, what are your processes? How are you handling these problems? What are your processes?
Well, so it's interesting. So, we have a central security team, right? And the goal is to kind of get to where, Eli is in AWS, which is there's a dividing line between responsibility and accountability of security issues, processes, and secure product, where product teams should own their vulnerabilities and their risk, right? And then the security team on the external or outside of the organization should be an audit capability to be able to say, are you doing your job well? And we're double checking and verifying that you are handling your security in the way that you should. And ultimately that report goes up to the top and therefore gets pushed down from the bottom. Unfortunately, like the struggle is that process is there, right? The struggle is at the top. How do we convince the top that this should be enforceable? The audit needs to be enforceable, right?
Yep.
And prioritized. And the issue with very fast growing companies is everything is chaotic and everything is driven by revenue. And so unfortunately, the struggle is, even though we have the right placement, The company needs to get to the maturity level of where all that gets enforced from the top. And I think that's just a matter of growth and time, right? And maturity, where, okay, now you cannot release unless these pass certain, unless you're under this mark, right? That releases just don't happen. So in the meantime, what we do is you have to do compensating controls. You got to do what every other organization does, which is how do we, patch the right level of priorities so that we've got it under control? Or do we really focus on things like detection and response, where we don't get in the way of engineering, we don't get in the way of production and fast feature development. And what we do is we assume breach, right? Detection and response is assuming breach. We assume there's an internal insider going and trying to get our customer data. We assume these people are doing it, and how great can we get that level of visibility? And that's another method that we're taking.
And Caleb, you asked Kartik a question. I'm curious to hear your answer. What is the trend? What do you think will be in 1 year or 2 years or 3 years in your company and in general? Who will own more responsibility?
I hear what Eli is saying, and I feel like I want to live in that world. It sounds like an incredible world that I want to live in. But I think, Caleb's living this life right now where if you're working for a fast growing company, you're working like you're going to have a tough time saying, I'm going to stop you from doing this. You may not lose credibility, but you lose capital. And as a security person, there's only so much capital you can lose. And so the way I think about this problem is, yes, eventually I want to get to a point where product teams and engineering teams own their vulnerabilities and they're responsible for it. But the way I think about it is I want to dog food the stuff that I'm telling them to do. And that's kind of why I believe in sort of the owning certain services and building certain services ourselves model, because before I say, hey, use this golden image, this is going to work, this isn't going to create weird implications to your financial calculations, I want to be able to try it myself and say, this actually works. We updated this. This is fine. Don't worry about this. Before I say, use the secrets management system, it's going to work at scale, I want to be able to actually use it at scale myself. And so the way I generally see it is, yes, the security team should be a check and balance to the product and engineering organization and to the organization as a whole. But you can't, to me at least, I can't see myself doing that successfully at a fast growing company unless I am able to be successful the first time I do it, or at least the second time I do it. If it can't be something, try this, and then there's just a lot of roadblocks, there's a lot of problems, and people just start losing trust, or there's a production outage. People just start losing trust that, this can't be the right thing. I don't want to use this. How do you know this isn't going to affect customers? Stuff like that. At a lot of companies, slowing down isn't an option. As a company grows older, more mature, slowing down is, and that's when you take a harsher stance. Like right now, for instance, there are specific DevOps workflows where I'm just pushing back and saying, if you don't get rid of this by the end of Q4, I'm going to get rid of this for you. And it's a difficult conversation to have, and it makes a lot of people angry. But the way we handled it is we went to the central risk management team. We have the whole financial 3 lines of defense model. So we went to the central risk management team and said, here's a risk we want you to write a report on. So they write this report, we take it to the executives, we're like, hey, here's what the security team wants to do. We think this is a risk. And they stamp it and say, okay, this is a priority now. And then we push it down all the way. So I like to kind of think about it both as a check and balance, which is the audit function, but also I'm going to be in the trenches fighting this with you. And it kind of keeps the right tension levels for me, where when I go into a room and say no, people still tend to listen.
It creates this trust you mentioned.
Yeah.
And I believe in this paved road method a lot. The struggle that I've had in doing this is, even internally, the way the products are structured. Let's just take, for example, a data store, right? Let's pick a data store as a good example. The data store we use yesterday is not the data store that we use tomorrow. and Karthik knows this at these fast growing companies, like, holy crap, like this got changed, that got changed, this is changing. And so we don't have the resources and the funding capability to go and create the paved road models that we want because it just changes too fast. And that's a real struggle. You know, I remember coming in all naive into Databricks, you know, a year and a half ago, going, oh, I've got all these great ideas, like paved road, like we're gonna do this, and then you come here like, okay, like we have 50 CI/CD cycles this, you know, last month, and then the next month we reverted to 6, and now we're like, no, we want to go back to 50. You know, like there's just all this. There's so much change going on. It's just crazy. It's crazy.
Yeah, you know, one thing I want to say there is I agree with you. Like, you can create a paved road, but if people are like, I want to go through the jungle, like, I guess jungle it is. The way I'm thinking about this, and I'm not going to say I'm there yet. The way I'm thinking about this is the paved road is the path of least resistance. You go on the paved road, you're going to ship fast, you're going to get there, you're going to get in front of customers, it's going to be great. You want to go through the jungle? Cool. This is where the traditional security team steps in and say, oh, tell me more about this jungle. Oh, you want to build a hammock there? No, that's not going to work for you. That is the path of most resistance, that is the riskiest path. So that's in my ideal world, and hopefully a year from now, that's where we will be, where the paved road is the path of least resistance, and developers and data engineers and everyone, it's automatically goes to the paved road, because why would you want to go through the jungle when this is so cool?
I actually really like that model.
Yeah, I like it too. I like it too. I think it actually mirrors some experiences that I've seen inside AWS, and that there's very clear guidance that says, okay, you need to start engaging with the security team at least 6 weeks before your launch date. You know, to do a pen test and review those pen test findings, resolve any high priority ones, etc. If you don't do that, you're likely going to miss your launch date, because there's just no tolerance. There's no appetite from leadership for you to go to them and say, well, we could hit our launch date, but we won't be able to, you know, fully take care of all the pen testing issues. Or the pen test team isn't going to be able to complete their work in time because we didn't engage them early enough. There's just zero appetite for any of that as an excuse. And so, yeah, it's really is the paved road. The way to get a launch out fastest is properly engaging with the security team.
Yeah, we had at Capital One, we had this, every team was probably similar. Like every team had their own deployment kind of thing, their own focus on what they were doing. But in order to deploy, there was like literally like 60 days worth of paperwork and manual process that you had to go through in order to get something into production, right? Like it was massively painful. So you could have whatever you wanted, but you still had to go through this really painful process. And so what they did is they created this, okay, now we've created the single CI/CD pipeline, right? The blessed paved version of it, where security could stick in their pipes, right? Their checks. We had sort of this series of steps, these 7 stages that you had to go through. And as long as you pass these 7 stages, Capital One basically said we would allow one-click deploy, right? So you can come in, you can deploy straight to production, no paperwork, none of the manual process, but you had to pass through this sort of massive pipeline of these checks. And it was amazing, because, you know, it's like honey to bees, right? Like they were like, oh yeah, for sure. If I could do one, I will go down this path and make that happen. And it was a great forcing function. I really enjoyed that path of making it work that way. I do think you have to have a certain.
You mentioned when you joined Databricks, you had like big visions and big dreams. I wonder, what are the KPIs? You know, we all believe like in the big metrics and indicators and KPIs. What's the KPI here? I mean, how do you know that engineering and security are actually working together in, the best and most optimal way? What do you think?
I think that there's probably, let me say this. There are lots of very good KPIs that I am currently not using, I'm sure, right? Around how do you judge that? Like vulnerability is remediated prior to production, like, all of these time of vulnerability, like all these kinds of things that, we do track, but I'm not using as a metric for the relationship between engineering and security. I actually used a NPS survey as the relationship between security and the engineering team in Databricks. And I remember, when I first walked into the company, people said the relationship is very poisonous between security and engineering. And I was like, well, listen, hey, that tension exists in every company, right? Like it's natural, like it can't be that bad. And then I said, okay, well, let's do an NPS. Let's measure it, right? Let's do a survey and measure it. And it came back negative 75 as our first. And I was like, oh, this is going to be fun. But that, I will say, that is our measuring stick, right? That's our measuring stick between, is the relationship between engineering and security getting better over time? And what is that looking like? We use an NPS survey for that. And it's not the most, awesome of KPIs and metrics, but I feel like for a relationship kind of model, it does really well. And then we look at hard KPIs like time to vulnerability remediation, all these kinds of things as an alternative dashboard that we use.
One thing I want to say there. Yeah, I was just gonna ask Caleb. One mechanism to improve the relationship score on these NPS surveys, I'm thinking more as a social engineer here than as a security leader, but would be to say, oh, security is just going to stay out of the way. We're not gonna get in your way. We're just going to let you do whatever you want, and people suddenly have this positive impression of you. So, not recommending anybody should do that.
That's if you, as a security leader, run your team based on the NPS survey. You are correct. If you run your team, that's your metric as to whether we're doing everything great. You're right. But as you know, that is only one small data point around the entire rest of the security KPIs and things that you're doing. Yes, I would agree.
Right. And there are going to be cases where it's okay to have a bad NPS score, maybe because you don't have the maturity that is required for the security maturity that is required, and one of the VCs at some point called it like doing push-ups. When you first start doing push-ups, your body hates it. Your body has a negative 75 NPS score with you. But if you keep doing it, eventually your body's like, yeah, okay, this is cool, this is helpful. So yeah.
Now that's an interesting debate, right? Where is it okay that engineering hates you and that's okay, right? Like that is an interesting, very contextual, very customized, but like, wouldn't people argue there's always a better way at where engineering could also, you can get the same risk management done, but done in a way that works with engineering? Isn't that always going to be some argument against that?
And I guess
there
as a leader,
good argument. Yeah, sorry, there are very good arguments to say that, but like if you and I, like, we're people that go into a company when there isn't that much of a security team. We go in and we're like, okay, we need to build a security program. What do we need to do? Invariably, we're gonna have to make some controversial calls because maybe there isn't a release gate. Maybe there isn't a pen test practice. Maybe there isn't even a patching practice. Maybe there isn't a code review going on. Stable stakes, right? And when you introduce stable stakes that take I was able to ship code on day one to maybe understand our systems and how they work before you ship code, and maybe it'll take you a week. People are going to hate you, and maybe that is okay. And so if we were to say that, like, what are some hard, obviously leadership is going to be mad at you, everyone's going to be mad at you. At that point, what other KPIs would we use? Like what KPIs would counteract this bad NPS score?
This is an interesting thing. So let me give you the real example in Databricks. We did the S3 bucket shutdown, right? Where, okay, all S3 buckets need to have owners. No S3 bucket goes public without any sort of model or permission, right? From security. We had to go do this whole thing because it was a massive, massive problem. And so the timing of the NPS survey is an interesting angle here, right? Because if you had timed our NPS survey, our next one, during this time frame, it would have been really bad because everybody was pissed off about it, right? Everybody across our org, not just engineering, marketing, sales, support, everybody uses S3 buckets, right? And it was like wild, wild west chaos when we started. And we did all the right, we got approval from the top, we've messaged, pre-messaged, messaged again, met every single team one-on-one to message, right? Like we did all, and even at the time that the deadline came, the barrage of pissed offness was amazing in terms of the things that came in. But the thing is like what happens, just sort of like your push-up analogy, is now that's sort of a given, right? People have gotten used to it. The process is there. Although we do still get the occasional people who are upset about it, it's not that bad. But if we had timed our NPS surveys during that time versus now time, you're going to get a very, very different response, which I think is an interesting. NPS is a very snapshot in time.
Right. So let's, we're hitting the hour here. Would love to ask like last final question. And this was, what is your biggest advice for security leaders that want to get this relationship going and to improve the NPS score? So maybe Eli, you will go first.
I mean, maybe to play devil's advocate here a little bit, I would not worry about your NPS score. I don't think you're there to make friends. I think you're there to raise the level of security in a customer obsessed way. So I think the key is, picking a set of metrics, but I would veer more towards like time to live metrics for highly critical vulnerabilities, things like that. Get leadership buy-in and ownership that these are a priority, and drive performance against them.
Karthik, what do you think? What's your big advice?
My big advice is the same thing that I first told you when we met, Idan, which is build a strong engineering team. If you're at an early stage company, if you're at a high growth company, you're going to have more mileage bringing in people that are strong engineers that can roll up their sleeves and get things done. And you might end up paying for pen testing or vulnerability scanning or any of those things that you don't necessarily have the bandwidth for right away. Build a strong engineering team, build a strong relationship with your engineering team, build a strong foundation for when you're actually going to do some of those risky things that Caleb spoke about, with shutting down S3 buckets or saying you shall not use the secrets management system anymore. Build in a foundation so that you can actually make the change you need to make over time without getting shut down.
Caleb, what's your biggest advice?
Man, I do have to agree with Karthik. I think ultimately the right people is everything. And having both trust and respect from a technical capability where the security team is not just a bunch of IT and or compliance people and that's it. It's around people who do know how to build software and how to understand. I agree with that 100%. I also, though, even if you have that, getting the top execs and the VPs to hold engineering accountable is absolutely critical. And even if you have an amazing engineering team, you're still always fighting upstream until you can get the people at the top to agree that there is a watering line that all teams must adhere to, right? I think that's really important.
I get it. And I think my biggest thing that I'm taking for this discussion is like is trust, and how do you create trust? And usually, I came with the thought that, hey, we need to build like tons of tooling and technologies and mechanisms and processes. And I believe that eventually it's more cultural, and it's not how do you share responsibility, how do you as a security leader share responsibility with engineering? It's also how do you take responsibility from engineering and share that with them. And I like the word trenches here that Karthik mentioned. I totally believe in that. And I think, it's a huge dilemma, and it's a huge, it will not be solved today. And I think it will stay forever, this tension between engineering, DevOps, and security. But it's the secret sauce for how companies could work faster and move faster and build faster. And we as security leaders, we want to empower engineering so they could work with security much smoother. So thank you, Eli, Karthik, Caleb, for joining this lively discussion. And see you soon. And thank you, everybody, for joining this live broadcast. And have a wonderful day.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.